Hello, I'm Beth Webb. I'm a writer and I write children's books. Here's some of my books: Junkyard Dragon, The Dragons of Kilve, and Fleabag and the Ringfire. In fact, there's 3 Fleabag books. And I've come today to tell you about how to make up a story, because it's easier than you think. Lots of people ask me how I get ideas and how I write stories, but the big thing that most people say is they can't find an ending for your story. So what I'm going to tell you this morning should solve all of that, and it's easy and it's fun. And if you don't like writing, or you're not very good at writing, this is still for you, because there's thousands of ways to do stories. You can sing them, you can dance them, you can draw them. Writing them is good too, because that helps you remember them. But we're going to start with a story that you will all know, Little Red Riding Hood. And once we've done that, I'll show you how to put your own story together, and then it's over to you. So it's all easy peasy. Little Red Riding Hood lived with her mum and dad in a cottage at the end of the wood. And their granny lived at the other side of the wood, not very far away, but it did mean going through the dark trees and following a little windy path. Now, Granny hadn't been very well, and Mum or Dad had made sure they went to see her every day. But one day, Mum and Dad were both busy, and Mum said, "Red Riding Hood, are you big and brave enough to go to Granny's all by yourself? I've made her a cake and some lemonade." "Oh yes," said Red Riding Hood, "I know the way." "Good," said Mummy. "Now it's not a long walk, and you must stick to the path, and you mustn't go near the big dark cave where the big bad wolf lives." "I promise," said Red Riding Hood, and she gave her mummy a kiss, and she ran off down the path through the wood. It was a lovely sunny day, but inside the wood it was dark and shadowy, and Red Riding Hood clutched the basket and ran as fast as she could. But then she got distracted, because it was spring and there was bluebells everywhere, and she stopped and she began to pick them. And then she thought she heard a breath and a step nearby. She looked up. She wasn't scared. It was probably the woodcutter. But it wasn't the woodcutter. It was the big bad wolf, with his grey fur and his big ears and his big teeth. But he didn't seem cross or nasty. He just said, "Good morning. My name is Wolf. What's your name?" And Red Riding Hood, determined not to be scared, said, "I'm Little Red Riding Hood." "Pleased to meet you," said Wolf. "And where are you going?" And Red Riding Hood said, "I'm going to Granny's house. She lives in the cottage at the other side of the wood." "I know your Granny," said Wolf. "She and I are best friends. Perhaps I'll see you there later." And then he turned, and with a whisk of his big grey bushy tail, the wolf ran off amongst the trees. And then a thought struck Red Riding Hood. She had told a stranger her name and where she was going. That was not good. What was she going to do? Then she had an idea. She'd take one of the other paths, not the short one, but a longer one, and if Wolf was watching, he'd think maybe she'd been telling a porky about going to Granny's, and then the wolf might give up and go in a different way. So that's what she did. She ran the long way round through the trees. Meanwhile, Wolf, who had been about to eat his breakfast, which was a nice fat bunny rabbit, decided that perhaps Granny for breakfast and Red Riding Hood for lunch might be tastier. And so he went off on his big grey paws, pad, 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 through a secret way through the trees and the bushes, until he came to Granny's door. "Hello, who's that?" said Granny. And then the big bad wolf put on a Little Red Riding Hood voice and said, "It's me. It's Little Red Riding Hood." "Oh, come in," said Granny. "I've been expecting you." And the wolf pushed open the door, and Granny went, "Arr!" And she ran, and she hid herself in a cupboard, and she blocked the door so the wolf couldn't open it. And she sat in the darkness thinking, "Oh dear, I hope he goes away soon." Meanwhile, the wolf looked around and thought, "Bother, I've lost Granny. She was too quick for me. Where can I sit or hide so that Little Red Riding Hood will come all the way in and I can pounce and gobble her up? And then he looked around and he saw Granny's bed. And so he jumped into Granny's bed and pulled the duvet right up under his eyes. And there he waited, thinking, when Little Red Riding Hood comes in, I can go pounce. And so that's what he did. And he waited, but he didn't have to wait that long, because very soon there was a on the door. "Hello," said Wolf in Granny's voice. "Who is it?" "It's me, it's Little Red Riding Hood." "Come in, dear. I'm in bed. I don't feel very well." So Little Red Riding Hood opened the door and went in. And she looked at the bed and she looked at Wolf and she said, "Granny, you don't look well at all. Your ears have grown all big and furry." "All the better to see you with, my dear," said Wolf. And Red Riding Hood came a bit closer and said, "Your eyes look all funny. They're all big and sort of round. Are your eyes hurting?" And Wolf said, "All the better to see you with, my dear." And then Red Riding Hood looked at the wolf's big pointy teeth and said, "Granny, what big teeth you've got." And the wolf threw back the duvet and pounced and said, "All the better to eat you with." But Red Riding Hood was quick, and Wolf got tangled up in the duvet, and Red Riding Hood dropped her basket with the cake and the lemonade and ran out of the front door going, "Ah, ah, help! There's a big bad wolf and he's after me." Just as the woodcutter was coming along the path to deliver wood to Granny. And the woodcutter said, "Red Riding Hood, Red Riding Hood, what's the matter?" And Red Riding Hood said, "There's a wolf in Granny's bed, help, and I don't know where Granny is." So the woodcutter opened Granny's door and went in and saw the wolf. And he got a big coil of rope out of his rucksack and tied the wolf up and put him over his shoulder and took him a long, long way through the forest to another part where Wolf couldn't scare people anymore. And then Granny and Red Riding Hood sat in the garden and had cake and lemonade, but they made sure to save some for the woodcutter when he came back to thank him for saving them. Let's think about that story a bit. Now, who is the story about? Well, Little Red Riding Hood, obviously. And where is she? Well, she's at home. And what does Little Red Riding Hood want or need? Well, she wants to go to Granny's house to take her some cake and lemonade. And why? Well, Granny hasn't been very well, and so Red Riding Hood's going to take her a treat and sit with her for a bit. So it might seem a bit bonkers to think about the end of the story, where is Red Riding Hood going, when you're still at the beginning. But it's very, very important. You have to know what your characters want or need, what their goal is, where they're going, so that you can tell how they get there. And if you don't have an ending where she's going, then you'd have poor Little Red Riding Hood wandering around the forest for ages and ages, which is a very dangerous place to be, especially with a big bad wolf around. Now I'm going to show you some drawings to help you understand how stories work. Now, this is Kim. You can decide whether Kim is a boy or a girl. I'm going to call him a boy because we've just had a story about a girl. Now, Kim is in the kitchen and Kim wants some sweets, but Grandpa's put them right on top of the highest shelf, and so Kim can't reach. So you know who is in the story, Kim, where they are in the kitchen and what they want or need, the sweets. But how is Kim going to get what he wants? Kim looks around the kitchen and thinks, what can he use to help him get to the top? Kim is little and the shelf is high. So Kim doesn't need the cat bowl or the rug or his little brother's baby mug. They won't help him, unless of course the rug is a flying carpet, but I don't think it is, not really. Now Kim could use the broom and knock down the jar of sweets, but then the jar would break and Kim couldn't eat the sweets because they'd be covered in glass, so that won't work either. So what can Kim use? He could climb on the chair and then onto the table, and then he might be able to reach. No, It's still a bit high. He can't quite reach, can he? And then he spots the stool and he thinks, if I climb onto the chair and then onto the table and put the stool on the table, and then I might just be able to reach. Yay! And he can. Kim can get the sweets down. So you've got a vague idea of the ending, that Kim wanted the sweets. Now you've got to think about how it's going to end. You can end it any way you like. It can be funny, the dog getting the sweets, sad, Kim being sick, or sensible, Kim learning that he mustn't climb on chairs and put stools on tables and climb up because it's dangerous. Any way you like. But do you see how knowing who is in the story, Kim, where they are, in the kitchen, and what they want or need, the sweets, is a really good way to help you build a story. Now, there's lots more we can put in, but this is just story making for beginners. So now we know how a story is made. Let's think about Little Red Riding Hood again. Where is she at the beginning? At her own house. What does she want or need to get to Granny's house? And we've already thought about why, because Granny's been ill and she'd like some cakes and a visit to cheer her up. So we've got a good strong beginning and we know where we're going for the ending. Now the middle, as I've said, is how this all happens, how you get from the beginning to the end. And in Little Red Riding Hood's case, how is she going to get there? Through the woods. Who does she meet? The big bad wolf. And what happens when she meets him? Well, you know all of that. You can fill that bit in. But think about how you'd like the story to end. Maybe Little Red Riding Hood, Granny and the wolf actually all make friends and they all have tea together. Or maybe the woodcutter comes and kills the wolf or chases him away. What would you like to happen? It's your story. You can decide. Now, lots of people will tell you that stories have to be original and you mustn't use old stories. But I think the best place to start making stories is to start with a story you know and love and then retell it. So you can have Cinderella, Goldilocks, Three Little Pigs, Jack and the Beanstalk, whatever your favourite story is. But it's how you tell it that will make it original. You can put on a new ending or even add new characters if you like. So you choose your favourite story. It doesn't have to be a fairy tale, either drawing or writing on a big piece of paper, or both if you like, draw and write. Answer the questions. Who is in the story? Where are they? Then write down what do they want or need and why. Now remember, little Kim thought out the stages he had to go through to get from the floor to the top of the cupboard. It wouldn't have worked if he'd put the stool down and then climbed onto the table, because he couldn't have lifted the chair onto the table because he's only little. He had to get things in the right order. So your how is getting things in the right order to make sure you actually get to the ending. Little Red Riding Hood only had to put on her cloak, pick up her basket with the cake and lemonade, and then go off through the woods. Cinderella needed a dress and a coach. Now, what could she find to make them? Well, she found rats and mice and a pumpkin, didn't she? And Jack and his mum needed money. What could they sell? Well, they'd only got the cow left. Now think about why Jack sold the cow for beans. It was because he was too lazy to go to market, wasn't it? Now draw some pictures and write some notes to remind you of everything you've thought about. This is called a plan. Now, don't forget, if you think of a better idea while you're making your story, you can change your plan. It's just something to help you start. It's not something you have to stick to. Now you've got lots of drawings and notes, it's time for you to turn them into a story. How do you think you're going to make your story? Do you think you're going to dance it? Do you think you're going to sing it? Do you think you're going to write it or tell it out of your head? You can draw, dance and sing it. You can tell it in 100 different ways. You can do anything you like to make your story. And what will you do with your story once you've made it? Now I'll tell you a secret. When I started writing, I gave my stories as presents. I had no money, and so I wrote stories and gave them as birthday presents. But you could dance or sing your story or turn it into a poem, and then you can read it out and then you can send it to your grandparents or your cousins. You can do lots of ways of present making with stories. So why don't you have a go? Make a story. And don't forget, you need to know who's in it, where they are, what they want or need. It's quite useful to think about why as well, and then how they're going to get there. So it's dead easy. Who, where, what do they want or need, why, and how are they going to get there? Easy peasy. Give it a go. Make a story.